If you were creating a school curriculum for data literacy and how to understand risk, what would you include as, say, the three most important topics or themes that we should cover in that school curriculum?
Oh, well, yes, please. I would love that opportunity. Okay. I think I would try to make it very practical. So I would think, when is it that young people as they get older kind of run into risk information and have to take a decision themselves to deal with it? So I think the first thing the first topic or theme would be, how do you use risk information to take decisions? And I would scout around for a whole bunch of examples of posters and websites and newspaper articles and stuff where there's risk information, and I would invite the students to take a look at it and to think about how we interrogate it and we understand it. So that could be, on the one hand, okay, sometimes we've got to make a bit of a mental effort to think about probabilities, especially some of the more kind of challenging aspects of probabilities, like cumulative probabilities. So here it's telling me what's going to happen in any particular year, but actually what I want to know is it going to happen to me over my lifetime? So how do we understand that? Or conditional probabilities. So here it's telling me what's going to happen if this other thing also happens. So how do I understand those? And that's very much kind of sort of risk literacy kind of focus. And then I would broaden it out a bit and say, how do we deal with information which is, inherently uncertain? And there I would want the students to have a sort of healthy skepticism towards risk claims. Think, do I trust this data? Do I trust the source of the data? If it's health data, what sort of study was it based on? Was it like an epidemiological study? Is this basically about correlations, or was this a randomized control trial in which I can be more confident of the causal nature of the claim that's being discussed? And then, even bigger than that, the difference between significance as the statistician understands it and significance the way the rest of us understand it. Like, okay, it's different, but is it different enough to matter? So you found from a statistical point of view that these two groups are different from one another, but is the effect size big enough for it to matter to the decision that I take? Okay, so that would be theme one. Theme two would be about how we talk to other people about risks. Because, well, some of these decisions are individual ones, but a lot of the time we're bumping up against other people who have different views about a risk from ourselves. And we have to find a way to talk to them and to come to some kind of agreement about whether a thing is a high risk or a low risk and what we should do about it together. And I'm thinking here about parents with teenage children having a discussion about, is it risky to go out late at night? And the usual format of the discussion is, yes, it is, no, it isn't, yes, it is, no, it isn't. How do you move on from that? And how do we understand these differences and find a way to agree or accommodate each other's views? And I think that starts with perhaps, well, let's agree on the question. What's the definition of the risk that we're talking about? What's the nature of the harm? To whom? And do we share an evidence base that we could both refer confidently to? So if we're going to assess this risk together, what information do you think we need in order to assess the risk? And is that different from me? So if we can have that, if we can have a common definition of the scope of the risk, and we can have a shared evidence base, well, we still might disagree about prioritization, we still might disagree about trade-offs, but we've come a lot closer to understanding each other's positions. And I think, well, hopefully we also get a bit closer to an accommodation. And then I think the third theme would be about how we as citizens engage in public debates about risk. And this would be more about trying to get people to be more involved. Because I think most of us, most of the time, are not thinking about the risks that we face and all the measures that are in place to protect us from those. I mean, we're surrounded by a web of safety regulation related to, the water we drink and the food we eat and the transport we use and how that's protected. I mean, we might get mildly irritated sometimes by like having to take our shoes off at the airport because of security risk, or or just scoff at that note on the coffee cup which says caution, contents may be hot. But most of the time we're pretty happy just to kind of ignore all the work that goes into assessing risks and coming up with regulations that are an appropriate response to those risks. And there are all those regulatory agencies out there which are filled with often, very conscientious people taking high quality scientific advice and trying to do that for us. And it's only when something goes wrong, when there's a crisis, that suddenly we focus our attention on them and we say, you've been doing a terrible job. And the result of that is often that, politicians and sometimes, fueled by public opinion, triggers some kind of change in regulation, to make it more stringent or to change it in a way that imposes very significant costs on society, and maybe brings only a marginal or perhaps no benefit at all. But it's this knee-jerk reaction to, in hindsight, right, with hindsight bias, to something that's maybe improbable, but does happen sometimes. And I think if people could understand a bit better how that risk regulation works, who does it, on what basis, what kind of scientific information they use for that, then maybe that could sort of elevate the public debate a bit when it comes to crises, or, ideally not. Ideally, we don't get to the crisis. But when it comes to deciding on regulations and the appropriate level of regulations, and that people could be a little bit more aware of how they don't have to think about risks a lot of the time because they've effectively delegated that risk management to an agency. And I feel like they should be more interested in that, and more aware of what those regulators do on a regular day.
To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.